always provide a sanctuary to people who are having the lights switched off on their own liberty and personal freedoms. And this new plan will build upon that. Now, thirdly, I am quite astonished, in fact, Mr. Speaker, the tone of the Honourable Gentleman's comments, repeatedly suggesting that we just turn a blind eye to people attempting to come into our country illegally, people that are being smuggled in small boats, in the back of lorries. He will well know that we have stood in this House too often to hear about the tragedy of people that have died, whether it's in the Channel or in the back of refrigerated lorries. And I will not apologise for being abundantly clear that an illegal journey to the UK is not worth the risk. And that is what this plan is about. It is about tackling illegal migration, protecting lives, and of course, alongside that, creating new routes. Finally, the Right Honourable Gentleman accuses me and the government of lacking compassion. He accuses me of taking an inhumane approach. Now, I would just suggest politely to the Right Honourable Gentleman that he should not really resort to personal attacks of that nature. As someone, and my own family in particular, that understands what oppression is like and fleeing persecution and sought refuge in the United Kingdom and has successfully, like millions of others, rebuilt their lives. But I do think that lack of substance is not surprising because there are no plans on the party opposite to fix the broken system. And in fact, I understand last night, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party's response to my plan was very much to look at my plan. So what I do suggest is that as long as they are devoid of a plan of substance, they themselves are defending a broken system that is encouraging illegal migration and supporting criminality, defending a system which is enabling an established criminal trade in asylum seekers, causing human misery, a system which is disregarding the world's most vulnerable, elbowing women and children to the side, a system which is resulting in, as I have seen far too often, the tragic loss of life. The family of 5 drowned on their way to this country, our country, only last year. The 39 victims in Purfleet found dead in the back of a refrigerated lorry only in 2019. That, Mr. Speaker, is inhumane. And if the Honourable Gentleman and his party is prepared to be associated with that criminal trade in asylum seeking and human misery, then he is the one that lacks compassion. And it's not a position that we will take, and I will not be complicit in defending the indefensible on that basis. Finally, Mr. Speaker, it is quite extraordinary to hear from the Honourable Gentleman in the party opposite lectures about our border when it is still the official Labour Party policy to maintain and extend free movement rights as per their party conference motion. In effect, Mr. Speaker, to have open borders. We are the only party prepared to tackle this issue of illegal migration, show compassion to those that are being trafficked in the world, and create safe and legal routes so that we can help to save lives.
Let's go to Sean Bailey. Sean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome my right honourable friend's statement because, just like my constituents, I'm angry at the images that we're seeing of small boats coming into the Channel and the skyrocketing costs of our asylum system, resources which could be used to tackle the inequalities in areas such as the Lost City in Tipton and give those kids on that estate the chances to succeed. But the broader issue here, Mr. Speaker, is this. Our European neighbours need to step up. It's as simple as that. So can my right honourable friend reassure my constituents in Wednesbury, Oldbury and Tipton who have put their faith in her that she will continue to make the point to our European neighbours they have got to step up because it is not fair on the United Kingdom to take the lion's share of protecting some of the most vulnerable people in our society.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is absolutely right, and we are a compassionate nation, and we stand by everything that we do when it comes to providing humanity and protection to individuals that are being persecuted. And he's made the point incredibly well on behalf of his constituents that we will continue, as I will today, with the G6 and our international counterparts and across European Union member states, that they also need to do more. Because until they do, people will continue to die. And this is a collective responsibility that we all have.
Let's go to SNP spokesperson Anne McLaughlin.
There is so much wrong with these proposals that distilling it into 2 minutes is impossible, Mr. Speaker. What person, what government with an ounce of compassion or respect for international law would even consider, as they are doing, casting vulnerable people off to an island using an offshoring system that, in Australia's case, has been described by the UN as an affront to common decency? Who, with any regard to the rule of law, would limit the right to appeal? The high success rate of asylum appeals clearly shows the Home Office are getting these decisions wrong too often. Are we or are we not still signatories to the UN Refugee Convention? Is the Home Secretary aware of Article 31, which prohibits penalising someone for the way in which they reached a country, or for that matter, for arriving so-called illegally? Does she know that nowhere in there does it say that someone cannot transit through another country to get here? That was never the intention of the convention, and to say it is simply untrue. Does she remember that Nicholas Winton, rightly hailed as a hero for rescuing hundreds of children from Nazi refugee camps, was reported to have forged documents because the Home Office were too slow? Those children would today be classed as illegal and he would be a criminal. But he was a hero because he recognised that desperate people have no choice. And the same is true today for many who reach our shores. The Home Secretary should be ashamed to make this statement today, Mr. Speaker. There is nothing pretty about this. It's ugly dog whistle politics, and I can tell her that the SNP wants no part in it. More importantly, Scotland will not live with the associated shame of this. Scotland recognises its international and moral obligations, but we also recognise that we're prevented by the UK government from living up to them. I despair for those having to live under this toxic environment. I will always offer my solidarity, but I'll also work even harder to ensure Scotland votes yes to independence so that we at least can continue to treat vulnerable people with compassion and dignity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, firstly, Mr. Speaker, I will refer the Honourable Lady to my statement, and if she reads it and had even bothered to listen to it, she would have heard a compelling case for stopping people trafficking, stopping illegal migration, and creating safe and legal routes, something I would have thought she would warmly welcome. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, in response to the Honourable Lady, it seems to me that the Nationalist Party in Scotland need to do much more themselves to walk the talk when it comes to resettling refugees and working with the government when it comes to housing individuals that are fleeing persecution. And sadly, that work is not taking place. I can see her involved in some gestures towards me, Mr. Speaker. But if she would very much like to come into the Home Office and have discussions about resettlement schemes and routes in constituencies, I'd be more than happy to look at that. And finally, Mr. Speaker, well, our ministers would be delighted to welcome her into the department for that conversation. She speaks about our plans not being in line with the Refugee Convention. Well, again, if I may, Mr. Speaker, I would like to correct her. Our new plan for immigration is in line with our international obligations, including the Refugee Convention. And she will also know that the Refugee Convention does allow for differentiated treatment, where, for example, she can shake her head, but perhaps she'd like to listen, refugees have not come directly from a country of persecution.
Right, let's go to John Howell. John.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome particularly what my right honourable friend is proposing in dealing with people smuggling. But this is a bigger problem than simply the EU. The Council of Europe is dealing with this right across the Mediterranean and also from the Middle East. And will she join me in helping to share her approach with members of the Council of Europe as an example of what can be done?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and if I may, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to commend my honourable friend for the work that he's been doing with the Council of Europe, and in the past we've had many conversations as well about this very issue, about people, ways of working, but upstream issues around illegal migration. And he is absolutely right to highlight the issue around the Mediterranean. Too many people have died, tragically, under the most appalling circumstances. I'd be more than happy to work with him in terms of how we pursue this further.
Let's go to the Chair of the Select Committee, Yvette Cooper. Yvette.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Safe Passage report increasingly long waits for child and teen refugees in camps in Greece and elsewhere to be able to reunite with family in the UK who could care for them since the Dublin and Dub schemes were ended. Ministers promised us they would put in place safe legal routes in replacement, but they haven't done so and things are not working. So talking about safe legal routes isn't good enough if they don't materialise in practice. Does the Home Secretary not accept that, especially when it comes to vulnerable children and teenagers, lack of safe legal routes to rejoin family will drive more of them into the arms of dangerous people traffickers and make the situation much worse?
Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, if the Honourable Lady had heard my statement, she would have heard some figures about those that are being trafficked right now. They're predominantly single men. She makes a very, very valid and important point, actually, and supports the case for safe and legal routes around children in particular. This isn't just about camps in Greece. And let's not forget, of course, we have been in a pandemic. And that is part of the reason, as she knows, and we've discussed this at Select Committee, and many honourable members in this House know this as well and have been reminded of this again and again and again. The government is absolutely committed, as the record shows, to resettling children and committed to family reunion rights. That is absolutely right. And we are doing that. We are committed to that. But through safe and legal routes, we need to create new routes and not just from the camps in Greece. The Honourable Lady will know as well, and I've been to many myself within regions where there are wars taking place and conflict. We need to create safe and legal routes, not just from the Mediterranean, because too many people are being smuggled to that Mediterranean route. We need to do much more in country and in some of those terrible zones, and I hope that she would actually support this work on that basis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend is aware, many asylum seekers are being housed in hotels in central London and many hundreds in my constituency. Will my right honourable friend assure me that today's announcement will speed up the asylum process, that those who are successful will be resettled and those who are not will be quickly returned, and we can get the numbers in hotels down to zero?
And is absolutely right, and she's well versed in facts, and I do thank her for the way in which she's worked with ministers and myself and the Home Office on this issue of accommodation in her constituency. She and members of this House will know that the hotel policy is very much linked to the pandemic because we have not been able to utilise regular accommodation and dispersed accommodation. So along with contingency, we have been using hotels. But Mr. Speaker, there is another point to make here as well, which is about the processes that we have to look at cases. We are going to change the end-to-end system, and there is a reform package in place, including digitalisation of caseworking, faster assessments, all sorts of work on that basis, so I can give my honourable friend that assurance.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Home Secretary tell us when the first refugees will be allowed to enter the UK under her new scheme, and how many will be settled each year?
Well, the honourable gentleman, the right honourable gentleman, will know that this paper today, the new immigration plan, is a consultation document. It's a command paper. So we are consulting, and we'll work with everybody that wants to work with us constructively on this. This will be subject to new legislation, and he will know the processes. But we as a government are absolutely committed. We are already in discussion right now with partner organisations that we can work with on safe and legal routes. And this is essential because when we look at the fact that there are 80 million people that are displaced in the world seeking refuge, we have a moral responsibility and an obligation to do the right thing and stand by those that are fleeing persecution, while at the same time not only working with other partners but other countries as well to make sure that they raise the bar too.
But Jacob Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a fantastic plan to fix our broken asylum system outlined today. This plan prioritises help to those most in need with safer legal routes, will stop deaths in the Channel and in lorries from people attempting illegal entry, deter those who abuse the system and jump the queue, particularly with a new age assessment process, and introduces new life sentences for the real criminals in all of this, the people smugglers. But my constituents will be rightly asking, when? Can she outline the timetable for implementation of this plan and how they can get involved?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his constructive tone and comments. This plan is subject to consultation. This should be a people's consultation. The British public, with the publication today, should absolutely, I'd encourage all members to get their constituents on board and to join this consultation. And at the end of this consultation, we'll obviously draft a bill and we'll bring this to Parliament for second session.
Right, let us go to Bel Ribeiro Addy. Bel.
Mr. Speaker, the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees and its 1967 protocol state that anyone seeking asylum should be able to claim in their intended destination or another safe country. But the government's new plan discriminates between people fleeing the same persecution based on their route or mode of transport. Does the Home Secretary realise that under this new plan, trafficked women, LGBTQ people, those fleeing political and religious persecution will be left with limited options? And rather than expanding safe and legal routes, this plan could actually leave more of those seeking family reunion at the mercy of people smugglers. This plan does not meet the needs of the most vulnerable. So can the Home Secretary explain how she reconciles this obvious misrepresentation of our obligations under international law?
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, I would advise the Honourable Lady to actually read the immigration plan, because in it she will see that the plan is in line with international obligations, including the Refugee Convention. And secondly, she's spoken already about categories of individuals that will be persecuted for who they are, their values, seeking to flee. Under our Safe and Legal Routes scheme, of course, they will be covered in that scheme. So she's completely wrong in her own misrepresentation.
Let's go to Alexander Stafford. Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents and I in Rother Valley welcome strong action in tackling illegal, dangerous migration. I know that my right honourable friend and her department are working tirelessly to bring the criminals facilitating the illegal channel crossings to justice and tackling this exploitative crime. Does my honourable friend agree that there is no justifiable reason for migrants to be making this crossing and putting themselves and our border force in danger when staying in France remains a perfectly safe and right option for them?
My friend is absolutely right, and I thank him for his question. People should claim asylum in the first safe country they arrive in. And that is a point that we are making again and again and again. Currently, they are in the hands of people traffickers, in the hands of smugglers, and they are being duped, quite frankly, into false promises and false hope. So there is no doubt whatsoever that obviously working with our counterparts, I've already mentioned the G6, Mr. Speaker, we will be pursuing this with greater vigour with counterparts, but the principle that he raises is fundamentally correct.
Let's go to Paul Blomfield. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This cynical announcement is built on the availability of safe and legal routes. This morning, the Home Secretary claimed, and I quote, "We have safe and legal routes and we have a programme called the Syrian Refugee Resettlement Scheme." But she will know that the Syrian Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme actually finished at the end of February as its quota was filled. And there are no details of how the new UK resettlement scheme will work. So could the Home Secretary tell us how many people it will take, explain how it will operate, and outline, for example, the process available to a refugee from what is currently the world's worst conflict in Yemen?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I won't take any lectures from the gentleman opposite about resettlement schemes at all when this government has successfully resettled 25,000 people, he shakes his head, but it's true, through that resettlement scheme. I've made it quite clear that we are in discussion with partner agencies already. This is work that is underway, and he can shake his head and be as dismissive as he chooses to be, but if he bothered to read the new immigration plan, he will see in there details of exactly how we will start to introduce, through legislation, new safe and legal routes.
Richard Fuller.
Mr. Speaker, Yarlswood Detention Centre at my constituency, set up under a Labour government in 2001, is a manifestation of the historical weaknesses of our immigration process, and in particular how they have failed women. Now, as my honourable friend knows, women asylum seekers are more likely to be individually targeted as victims of gender-based violence, forced marriage, sometimes to very powerful people, or rape as an instrument of war. So will my right honourable friend please assure me that her reforms will provide for a fairer and more effective assessment of such cases?
Friend, Mr. Speaker, I thank him for his question. He's absolutely right. And this is why we have to fix this system, because currently we are not able to safeguard and protect those who absolutely need that help and support. And it does, Mr. Speaker. The categories that it covers are women that are being treated abhorrently, quite frankly, in conflict zones, but also being trafficked and having the most awful crimes undertaken as well. Also used in modern-day slavery, which is also a feature of the new immigration plan and how we will protect victims more. So he's absolutely right, and we will definitely be looking at all of that.
Let's go to Joanna Cherry. Joanna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now that the Home Secretary is planning on deporting even more asylum seekers than previously, will she address the lack of transparency on the content and scope of the UK government's existing returns and readmission agreements, as well as those under negotiation? And will she give an undertaking to remedy that lack of clarity and to publish these agreements for scrutiny? And will she also confirm that it's not the government's intention to send people back to countries where there's a real risk they will face torture or inhuman degrading treatment or punishment?
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm always interested in the comments from the Honourable Lady, particularly in light of the way in which she caucuses and campaigns against flight removals, for example, as we've seen previously when we've attempted to remove foreign national offenders, some of the most murderous people with awful criminal records from our country. Of course, I can guarantee that we will not be removing people to areas, parts of the world in which she has referred to. But I would also say, Mr. Speaker, that we do, and we are very clear in terms of the removal processes that we have, and also the categories of individuals that we remove, and the reasons as to why we remove them from the United Kingdom. And of course, that is predominantly those that have failed in their claims, but alongside that, many foreign national offenders who simply should not remain in our country.
Jonathan Gillis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I start by saying that I and the people of Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Tork warmly welcome this new plan to fix our broken system. Currently, the UK is one of the only countries in Europe not to use scientific age assessment to determine a person's age when they enter the country. I am sure many right honourable friends and members from across this House will have heard the stories of fully grown adults coming to the UK but claiming asylum as children. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that this statement will solve a very serious safeguarding risk for our young people?
Well, my friend raises such an important question, and Mr. Speaker, it's quite sobering, because I think over the years we've seen too many cases of adults posing as children, and that is quite unscrupulous behaviour. And I say that because of the safeguarding risks that my honourable friend raises. And he is right to say the UK is one of the only countries in Europe. They use scientific age assessment methods to determine a person's age. And where age has been disputed and resolved between 2016 and 2020, 54% were found to be adults, which of course presents a very, very serious safeguarding risk to our young people.
Ruth Catt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has form for lack of compassion towards those who have fled horrors that we can only imagine. From abandoning the Dubs child refugee scheme, to the broken system that is leaving asylum seekers in limbo for months, if not possibly years, and having to go to food banks because even the minimal support they're entitled to often isn't arriving. So how can my constituents have any faith in this government and whether it has one iota of compassion?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've said earlier on, I'm simply not going to take lectures about the lack of compassion from the Honourable Lady or the party opposite at all. I've been abundantly clear in terms of the reasons as to why we have to tackle this system. And the right honourable lady, the honourable lady opposite, may be interested to know that there is not a single solution here. This is about end-to-end reform of the system. And I know it might be an uncomfortable truth for her, but this does actually mean tackling backlog of cases. It does mean tackling the people smugglers. It does mean stopping the criminal trade in human misery. And I'm only sorry that she can't see that, because the way in which we demonstrate compassion is by fixing the system and supporting those who are in desperate need to come here.
Let's go to Ben Bradley. Ben.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the measures my right honourable friends laid out today, which will be warmly welcomed by my constituents in Mansfield, who just want to see a fairer system, both for people in genuine need and for UK taxpayers too. The most obvious example of that unfairness is the exploitation of people who are paying human traffickers just to be pushed out into the channel in a dinghy, particularly when they're coming from a safe country. So can she confirm that these measures are intended to ensure that these crossings are no longer worth the risk, and that should be increasing penalties available to law enforcement to be able to tackle people smugglers head on?
Well, my friend is absolutely right, Mr. Speaker, and as I've said in my statement, we need to break this trade. That is absolutely vital, because people are being used in such an appalling way and creating human misery. And I've outlined already the increases in sentences that we will be looking at in terms of sentences for facilitators and people smugglers, but also the new powers that we'll also be looking to give Border Force.
We now go to Rachel Maskell. Rachel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Immigration is the most defining issue of a government's character. Does it reach out to protect the most challenged people on earth or turn in on itself? When a government doesn't secure safe passage for people seeking asylum to come to the UK, criminal gangs will exploit them. So will the Home Secretary update the House on what steps she is taking to ensure that her policy is not just about building higher walls for people to climb over, but opening safer doors for people to walk through?
Mr. Speaker, I suggest that the Honourable Lady reads the new plan for immigration because it's spelt out in there.
Sir Ed Woodley.
Our present asylum system is a complete joke. Every young man living in misery in a failed state knows that if he managed to reach our shores, the chances of him being deported are virtually zero. And there is no point in introducing more and more penalties, more and more laws, unless we are prepared to deport people. Is the Home Secretary prepared to do what Prime Minister Abbott of Australia did? He ensured that because all arrivals were put in a secure location and left there until their claim was processed and they were deported or allowed to stay, there are now no unsafe arrivals in Australia. There are no deaths. There are no criminal gangs. The policy works. Is the Home Secretary prepared to be really tough in order to be kind?
Home Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've outlined already for the Right Honourable Gentleman, this proposal is a long-term plan and it needs to be addressed in the component parts that I have outlined. So the legal system, for example, which frustrates deportations, removals, very different system that we have here to Australia. But this is a fair but firm system because we have to be firm in terms of removing those that have exhausted all their rights and should not be here. That equally applies to foreign national offenders, which is part of the reason that I've outlined already in the new immigration plan.
Let's go to Margaret Farrier. Margaret.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Home Secretary has spoken of efforts to strike agreements with countries outside Europe with the intention of returning legitimate asylum seekers simply because of the method of arrival to the UK. It's likely that these countries will be the same ones that we seek trade deals with in the post-Brexit environment. So will the Home Secretary tell us what discussions she has had with colleagues in the FCDO and Department for International Trade about how these third country agreements will impact on trade negotiations?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me assure the Honourable Lady that this isn't just a Home Office policy. This is a policy across government. So she would have heard me say already and speak about the Ministry of Justice and resetting the judicial framework. We will work with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the FCDO, in terms of removals. That is always something that we have done in the Home Office, and we will continue to work with them when it comes to our bilateral agreements for returns and removals.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Like the overwhelming majority of my North West Durham constituents, I want to see genuine refugees protected with safer legal routes so we don't see people dying in the Channel or in lorries. But they also want to see the vultures, first of all, the people smugglers who peddle in human misery, and secondly, the lawyers who spin out cases at the cost of hundreds of millions of pounds to the taxpayer every year, stopped. Can my right honourable friend confirm that this plan helps both genuine refugees and also takes on those who seek to abuse the current system?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, Mr. Speaker, and of course, as I've outlined, and when he looks at the new plan as well, there is a chapter in the policy paper on the judicial reset that is required. When it comes to the immigration tribunal, immigration bail, the appeals process, we will streamline that. And we will deal with the wasted costs as well, which the British taxpayers are paying for. We want to use that resource to make sure the money is going to those that are in need and not just those that are gaming the system.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for her statement. I agree that those seeking asylum must do so in the appropriate way and that those who smuggle illegal immigrants must face the full extent of the justice system. However, I do have a concern, Secretary of State, over the role of children in these situations, as a child has no say over whether they are brought over legally or illegally. So will the Secretary of State outline special circumstances in place when it comes to children and minors who are totally innocent of deceit or of trying to play the system?
Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend makes such an important point about vulnerability and children in particular. It is, we need to find the right way in which we can safeguard them. And this is exactly the work that we are going to undertake with partner agencies to look at not just bringing them from camps in Europe, because Europe is a safe continent, but in particular from those parts of the world where we are seeing the most appalling levels of conflict, instability and persecution.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome the package of measures my right honourable friend has brought forward today, particularly the maximum life sentences for people smugglers, so that there can be no wriggle room in the justice system when these abhorrent criminals face justice. Will she also look at introducing a very high minimum sentence so that the message goes out loud and clear that this is unacceptable and will face the full force of the law in this country?
Honourable friend, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is absolutely correct on this, because we have to have the right sanctions and deterrents in place so that these people smugglers, their model is broken up. And of course, this will be part of the consultation and I will absolutely work with him and others on this whole proposal.
Video link. Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's shocking to see some of the overcrowded and squalid accommodation, including in military barracks, used to house asylum seekers. Safe accommodation for vulnerable people is critical in any compassionate and effective asylum system, but particularly in the middle of a pandemic. So within her reforms, how does the Home Secretary plan to improve the quality of housing for people seeking asylum?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Honourable Lady will absolutely know, in terms of the contingency accommodation that we've had to use because of the pandemic, we have looked at all sorts of options. But accommodation going forward, we use dispersed accommodation, and I do come back to the point about working with local authorities who will also be part of our discussions and consultations going forward. It's vital that we grow that footprint, and I'd be more than happy for her to work with us in coming up with alternative proposals on accommodation.
Tim Lawson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome these proposals today, as I know my constituents and those of the South Coast constituencies in particular will do, and especially the distinction between those people who are wealthy enough to pay to be illegally smuggled into this country and those genuine refugees who go through the right processes. On safe and legal routes, will she give me the assurance that the successor to Dublin will be at least as generous as Dublin and the relatives that it covers, that it will be much more speedy in the processes to get people here who are deemed to have a place in the UK as soon as possible, and would she consider a Dubs 2 scheme, which was so successful in rescuing genuine endangered children from danger spots around the world, because it works so well?
So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd be more than happy to meet with the Right Honourable Gentleman to discuss this further. We need to get this right in terms of safeguarding children, and there is no one-size-fits-all here at all. And not only that, we need to learn the lessons of previous schemes as well and look at how we can strengthen some of the aspects around resettlement, for example, that may not have been strong enough. So I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with them about it.
Video link. Mick Whitley.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Instead of taking action to fix a broken and uncaring immigration system, the government instead seems intent on abandoning its long-standing humanitarian obligations, including the 1951 UN Refugee Convention. Does the Minister accept that this government's failure to improve the range of safe and legal routes to the UK will in fact push more people in the hands of people traffickers and increase the likelihood of tragedy in the English Channel?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm quite surprised by the Honourable Gentleman's statement and comment. Bear in mind he's not even had a look at the plan itself. It's quite clear to see. Because to do nothing is not an option, because people are dying. And these proposals are in line with the Refugee Convention and within international law and within ECHR. So I would recommend, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that rather than shake his head, the Honourable Gentleman reads the proposals and actually joins us in wanting to stop illegal people smuggling and to save lives.
Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I welcome my Right Honourable friend's determination to prevent illegal crossings and tackle the scourge of people smuggling. Does my Right Honourable friend agree that there is no justifiable reason for migrants to cross the Channel and put lives at risk when France remains a perfectly safe option for them?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and this is absolutely the point, Mr Deputy Speaker. France and other countries across the EU member states are safe countries. People are not fleeing persecution from those countries, and they should and could claim asylum in those countries, and that is effectively what we need to work harder to achieve.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. In her statement, the Secretary of State said, "We celebrate those who have come to the UK lawfully and helped build Britain." So, can the Secretary of State assure us that while those people are awaiting the Home Office processing their claims, they are enabled to contribute to the economy of the United Kingdom by working, paying income tax and national insurance, rather than subsist on the meagre handouts which barely allow them to eat?
Well, the Honourable Lady will be well aware of the rules in place for asylum seekers currently in the UK. And also, if I may say so, Mr Deputy Speaker, a reminder that we are in a pandemic. So there are restrictions in terms of accommodation, movements and things of that nature. But the Honourable Lady, if she'd like to be refreshed on those rules, I'd be more than happy to drop her a line.
Biddy Link. Elliot Colburn.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And one of the most common things I hear on the doorsteps in Carshalton and Wallington is frustration about an immigration and asylum system that simply doesn't work. So I know they will warmly welcome this firm but fair plan set out by my right honourable friend. And can she assure me that this will both tackle the criminal gangs exploiting vulnerable people and help reduce those dangerous attempts of small boat crossings across the Channel in favour of safe and legal routes?
My friend is absolutely right, and I know he's raised concerns about this issue in the past. And it's right, we have to absolutely break up the criminal trade, a criminal trade in human misery. And with that, of course, we will continue to do everything possible through these reforms. These are reforms that we are proposing today, which will go to public consultation, and then we want to bring in new legislation. Through the new legislation, absolutely achieve the outcomes that we are outlining today.
Biddy Link. Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. I've always believed that we have a duty to meet our international obligations in a fair, firm and humanitarian way, and the current system is failing on all three. But it's also important that we draw the distinction in this debate between legal migration, refugees, victims of people trafficking and illegal immigration. They are all very different things. Now, the Home Office has announced plans to introduce tougher age assessments. Can the Home Secretary confirm to the House that these new assessments will be sensitive to disabilities, trauma and medical needs, as well as being carried out with dignity and respect?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman makes some valid points around not just age assessments, but the categories of vulnerability that we are speaking about. We are launching a consultation today, which he will be aware of, and that is absolutely right that we give all due consideration to the different needs of individuals, as well as the circumstances and the situations that they are fleeing.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Never before have we had a Home Secretary who has shown such determination to finally get a grip of our failed and broken asylum system, and she deserves immense credit for this statement today. The residents of Blackpool are sick and tired of the delaying tactics used by left-wing human rights lawyers to prevent the lawful removal of failed asylum seekers. As a nation, we need to do far more to ensure that those who don't have a right to stay in the UK are deported. Absolutely. Can my right honourable friend reassure me that the measures outlined today will help to achieve that?
My honourable friend is absolutely right on this, and this is a very, very significant part of the frustrations of the system. And in fact, Mr Deputy Speaker, there are far too many predecessors in the Home Office that have all spoken about this as well. So the reforms that we are outlining today will mean a reset of the judicial framework around illegal, not just illegal migration, but immigration courts, bails, tribunals, and legal aid. And we absolutely need to grip this and bring around changes that will give justice to individuals that need the protection and the support that we want to give them.
And I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for her statement today in responding to the 30 questions on the call list. We will now suspend for 3 minutes for the usual arrangements. Order! Order. Order. I now call Secretary Robert Jenrick to make a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with permission, I wish to make a statement about Liverpool City Council. Merseyside Police have been carrying out an investigation involving a significant link to Liverpool City Council. Last year, this led to arrests on suspicion of fraud, bribery, corruption, misconduct in public office, and witness intimidation. On the 17th of December, I informed the House that additionally, persuasive evidence had been presented to me regarding the Council's planning, highways, regeneration, property management functions, and associated audit and governance arrangements. In light of that evidence, I commissioned Max Caller to conduct a best value inspection of the Council. I want to thank Max and his assistant inspectors, Vivian Geary and Mervyn Greer, for their thorough and evidence-based review. I have today placed a copy of their report in the library of the House. It paints a deeply concerning picture of mismanagement, the breakdown of scrutiny and accountability, a dysfunctional culture putting the spending of public funds at risk and undermining the city's economic development. The report identifies multiple apparent failures by Liverpool City Council in complying with its best value duty. This includes a failure of proper and due process across planning and regeneration, including worrying lack of record keeping. Indeed, documentation had sometimes been created retrospectively, discarded in skips, or even destroyed. A lack of scrutiny and oversight across highways, including dysfunctional management practices, no coherent business plan, and the awarding of dubious contracts. A failure of proper process relating to property management, including compliance with the Council's own standing orders, leading to a continued failure to correctly value land and assets, meaning taxpayers frequently lost out. When selling land, the report states that Liverpool City Council's best interests were not on the agenda. Poor governance arrangements for council-operated companies, an overall environment of intimidation described as one in which the only way to survive was to do what was requested without asking too many questions or applying normal professional standards. The review finds that there was a fundamental failure by members to understand and appreciate the basic standards governing those in public service, and with no regular ethics or standards committee and no means of monitoring complaints effectively, there was no established way to hold those falling below those acceptable standards to account. As a whole, the report is unequivocal that Liverpool City Council has failed in numerous respects to comply with its best value duty. It concludes that the Council consistently failed to meet its statutory and managerial responsibilities, and that the pervasive culture appeared to be rule avoidance. It further concludes that changes need to be radical, delivered at pace, and there was no confidence that the Council itself would be able to implement these to any sensible timescale. There may also be further issues of which we are not yet aware, and the report is careful not to speak to matters that might compromise the ongoing police investigation. I want to underline the report is not a verdict on all the staff working at Liverpool City Council. In fact, the report commends the hard work and dedication of many. The report is also clear that the current Chief Executive, Tony Reeves, and statutory officers have taken positive remedial steps, and I wish to thank Tony for his dedication and service. Neither does it comment on the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, on Mayor Steve Rotherham, or other councils in Merseyside. Despite the good work undertaken by Mr. Reeves, there is a clear picture that there has been a serious breakdown of governance at the council. If unchecked, It will allow improper conduct to persist, further undermining public confidence, putting public services at risk, and damaging the city's ability to attract investment from reputable developers and investors for regeneration, and to take full advantage of new economic opportunities, such as the recent successful application for Freeport status. Expressed in formal terms, I'm satisfied that the Council is failing to comply with its best value duty. Therefore, I need to consider exercising my powers of intervention to secure compliance with the duty. To that end, in line with the procedures laid down in the Local Government Act 1999, I'm writing today to the Council asking them to make representations, both on the Inspector's report and on a proposed intervention package. This package is centred on putting in place commissioners who I will appoint to exercise certain and limited functions of the Council as required for a minimum of 3 years. I'm also proposing that the Council will, under the oversight of the commissioners, prepare and implement an improvement plan. This would require the following provisions. Within 6 months, to approve a suitable officer structure, providing sufficient resources to deliver the Council's functions in an effective way, including the improvement plan and its monitoring and reporting. Within 12 months, to review and change the Council's constitution. Within 24 months, to conduct a review of the roles and case for continuing with each subsidiary company of Liverpool City Council. To create a detailed structure and strategy for the highways function. To establish a plan to deliver an effective file management system. To implement a programme of cultural change so both members and officers understand their roles and the Council's activities are regulated, governed, and breaches are rectified swiftly. To require the consent of commissioners before either member or officer level agree heads of terms for any property transaction, and subsequent consent before any legally binding commitment is entered into. I also propose to direct that prior agreement of commissioners must be attained to any dismissal or suspension of statutory officers or the Assistant Director of Governance, Audit and Assurance or equivalent. Furthermore, any appointments to positions designated as a statutory officer or the head of internal audit must be conducted under the direction of and to the satisfaction of the commissioners. I hope and expect Liverpool City Council to take the lead in this path to improvement. However, given the gravity of the inspection findings, I must consider what would happen if the Council fails to deliver the necessary changes at the necessary speed. I'm consequently proposing to direct the transfer of all executive functions associated with regeneration, highways and property management at the authority to the commissioners. These are for use should the Council not satisfy the commissioners in their improvement processes. As I say, I hope it won't be necessary for the commissioners to use these powers, but they must, in my view, be empowered to do so to deliver the reforms that are required. The commissioners will report to me at 6 monthly intervals on progress being made. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the report also considers the impact of the Council's cycle of elections, where every year is an election year, concluding this system reduces scrutiny and inhibits long-term focus. It recommends that the Council should move to all-out elections and for the Council's size to be reconsidered. Accordingly, I'm also proposing to use my powers under the Local Government Act 2000 to provide for Liverpool City Council to hold whole council elections for the first time from 2023. This will be in addition to proposals for a reduced number of councillors elected on single-member wards, which the report also recommends. I believe it would be preferable to move to a single-member ward system at the earliest available opportunity. I'm now seeking representations from the Council on the report and the decisions I'm proposing to take by the 24th of May. The forthcoming elections will proceed as planned, and Liverpool City Mayor will be elected on the 6th of May, and the Cabinet will then have time to provide their views. If I decide to intervene along the lines I've set out today, I will then make the necessary statutory directions under the 1999 Act and appoint the commissioners, and I'll update the House on any conclusions in due course. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a rare occasion when central intervention is required. In addition to the measures I propose today, the government will work closely with the political, the business and the cultural leadership of the city and with the wider region, including with Steve Rotherham, the Mayor of the Liverpool City region. We will do all we can to support the city as it recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic and to give confidence to those who want to invest in the city, to contract with the council and to do business in Liverpool. As the son and grandson of Liverpudlians, I know Liverpool and I appreciate the sense of humour, the loyalty and the warmth of its residents. I also understand the city's independent spirit, and so I'm clear that we are embarking on a partnership to mend a politics that for too long has been rooted in a pervasive and rotten culture. I'm hopeful that this is the start of a new chapter for Liverpool City Council, because in all of this, it is the residents of Liverpool who are being let down, whose regeneration is being undermined, whose taxpayers' money is being wasted, and whose city is being besmirched rather than cited with municipal pride. Mr. Deputy Speaker, despite the rare cases, like Liverpool City Council, as a whole, councils in this country have a good record of transparency, of probity, of scrutiny and accountability. It is a reputation worth protecting. I will take whatever steps are necessary to uphold the good name of local government and to weed out practices that do it down. I commend this statement to the House.
Steve Reid. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for advanced sight of his statement and the report, and indeed for his openness with me throughout the process. This report raises grave and serious concerns about decision-making in key functions of Liverpool City Council. All councils are under an obligation to meet their best value duty and to ensure value for money at all times. In these respects, Liverpool City Council has been found severely wanting. Labour, both here and our leadership at the City Council, accept this report in full. The Council will respond to the Secretary of State's letter in detail, but we support his intention to appoint commissioners not at this stage to run the Council, as he says, but to advise and support elected representatives in strengthening the Council's systems. This is a measured and an appropriate approach. I want to reassure people in Liverpool that this does not mean government ministers are coming in to run their city directly. This is not, as some would put it, a Tory takeover. It's about the government appointing independent people of the highest professional standing to help the council improve as quickly as possible and intervening directly only if the council's elected leaders fail to implement their own improvement plan. Investigations are currently underway into matters raised in this report, and I will not preempt them. I do, though, want to reiterate my party's absolute commitment to protecting the public interest at all times and to upstanding the highest possible standards in public life. Given the concerns raised in this report, the General Secretary of the Labour Party intends to appoint a senior figure to lead a review and reassure the people of Liverpool that the Labour Party takes these concerns seriously and will take action against anyone in our ranks who is involved in wrongdoing of any kind. Our councillors in Liverpool have already met with senior Labour councillors from other parts of the country who will support them in strengthening the City Council's defences against any risk of fraud. The overwhelming majority of councillors and frontline staff will be shocked by what they read in this report. And as the report and the Secretary of State have made clear, the severe institutional weaknesses identified here do not obscure the outstanding work they have all done together over many years. The Prime Minister was right to praise the Council's impressive work in getting the city through the pandemic, and I want to add my thanks to everyone who continues to play a part in that. In particular, the report praises the Council's Chief Executive, Mr Tony Reeves, and I offer my support to him and to the Acting Mayor, Councillor Wendy Simon, for the work they have already started to put things right. I'd also like to put on record my thanks to Mr Max Keller and his team for putting this very important report together. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is a moment for change, and I know that everyone who cares about the great city of Liverpool and its wonderful people will accept this report and use it to strengthen the Council for the future.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Honourable Gentleman for the remarks that he's just made, for the way in which we have worked together over the recent months. He has been most helpful and constructive, and I hope that can continue. Can I thank him on behalf of the government for the remarks he's just made with respect to the Labour Party, with respect to the Labour group on Liverpool City Council. That's extremely welcomed. The step we've made today is unusual, and it's better to do this in a cross-party way. We all share the same interests, which are the delivery of public services, ensuring that the people of Liverpool get the value for money and the council that they deserve, and ensuring that it can attract the inward investment, the regeneration and the good quality development that the city certainly needs and we want to see delivered as we come out of the pandemic. He was right, and I thank him again for highlighting the Chief Executive, Tony Reeves, who has done an outstanding job. And in my remarks earlier, I praised his conduct and that of the other statutory officers at the Council. He's also right to say that this report focuses on particular functions of Liverpool City Council and does not comment on the wider delivery of public services in the city by the Council. There is no reason to question the delivery of adult services, children's services, other important functions that people in the city rely on. And he's also right to praise the work of many people in Liverpool, including within the City Council, in their response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I would underline my remarks once again that this is a report about Liverpool City Council. It is not about the neighbouring councils across Merseyside, and neither is it any reflection on the Mayor of the Liverpool City region, Steve Rotherham, and I extend my thanks to him once again for his cooperation and support. It's right that we take this action, and I hope that we can continue to work together on it. None of us do this lightly. Localism is our objective, but localism does require local accountability, transparency and robust scrutiny, and that, I hope, is what we can now achieve.
And I'd just like to say before I call any of the other members, whilst I don't believe, whilst there are a number of individuals under investigation, I understand that there has been no charges, so there's no sub judice involved, but I would caution members that it is best that they do not compromise any of the ongoing investigations in anything that they may or may not say. Video link. Andy Carter.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I also thank the Secretary of State for his statement today and welcome the steps he's outlined in relation to Liverpool City Council. And I welcome the steps he's taking to preserve the good name of local government too. I regularly hear from constituents with concerns in relation to the level of commercial activity that councils are now undertaking. Does he agree with me that some of the transaction councils are involved in are incredibly complicated, well beyond what councils would have traditionally been involved in, and that external audit and public scrutiny needs to be reviewed and greatly improved to protect taxpayers' interests?
Well, my honourable friend, I think, raises an important point. We ask a lot of local councils, and we'll ask it once again as we come out of the pandemic. We want them to be regenerating town and city centres. We want them to be investing in new housing, but we want them to do so carefully and not to invest in risky investments, not to transfer toxic assets from the private sector to the public sector. We've taken action as a government through reforming the Public Works Loan Board, through providing further guidance to local councils, and through the work of the report we commissioned from Sir Tony Redmond to ensure that the sector improves the way it handles this situation. Of course, the allegations made against Liverpool City Council are of a different magnitude to the ones that we've seen in other parts of the country. So I don't want to draw direct comparisons, but there is more work to be done at some other local authorities as well.
Midi Link. Clive Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is clearly a very serious situation. It's obviously a very major step to take powers away from elected representatives. So I really appreciate and accept the proportionate and correct response from the Secretary of State and from the Shadow Secretary of State as well. I also appreciate the Secretary of State's comments about the many hard-working staff in Liverpool, including the Chief Executive, who have got nothing to do to be blamed for in terms of this crisis, and also his comments about the general excellent performance of local government as a whole. Could I say the Secretary of State has set out very clearly his list of requirements from the City Council and when he expects those to be achieved by. So could I ask him, how will monitoring against these requirements be undertaken? How will Parliament be updated about them? And of course, it goes without saying, if there's anything the Select Committee can do to assist in that process, we stand ready to do so.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman, the Chair of the Select Committee, and I'd be happy to work with him should he require any further information or wish to discuss this matter further. If we go ahead with the proposal that I've made today, then the commissioners, once appointed, would report to me on a 6-monthly basis, and I would be happy to keep the House informed of the information they provide to me. We will ensure that there is an improvement plan in place for the city, which is produced by the newly elected mayor, by their cabinet, and supported by Liverpool City Council, but advised and guided by the commissioners that are put in place. And then it will be absolutely essential that that plan is delivered, and it will be for all of us in this House, and in particular for those members of Parliament representing parts of Liverpool, to hold the Council to account for the successful delivery of that plan. Our objective is to restore public confidence in the Council as quickly as possible so that residents can have confidence that they have a well-functioning Council in all respects, and so that all those people, legitimate businesses and developers and those wishing to contract with the Council, have complete confidence that Liverpool is a city open for business and they can work to drive up the city's prosperity as we come out of the pandemic.
Philip Holloway.
Praise both Max Caller, who's a superb inspector, and also the Secretary of State's decision to send in commissioners. Though the problems in Liverpool City Council are far worse, in 2018 in Northamptonshire, Max Caller was sent in to do a best value inspection, and subsequently the government sent in commissioners. Since that point, under the leadership of Commissioner Tony McArdle and the new political leadership of Councillor Matt Golby, the situation in Northamptonshire County Council has been transformed and their performance has been raised beyond all expectations. So the point I wish to make to the Secretary of State is, isn't it the case that if councillors and officers in Liverpool City Council respond positively to the challenge set to them by the government, actually public services in Liverpool City can be raised once again to the standards they should be at?
I think my honourable friend raises a very important point. My predecessors have used their powers of intervention very sparingly. They've done so on a small number of occasions in Doncaster, in Rotherham, in Tower Hamlets, in Hackney and in Northamptonshire. Each occasion was very different, but in most of those cases the intervention has proved successful and it has turned councils around. The commissioners will behave sensitively, will support the elected leadership of Liverpool City Council and will ensure that confidence is restored, public services are delivered properly and taxpayer money is spent wisely. This does require now leadership from the politicians in Liverpool, those who will be elected in the local council elections to come. But I look forward to working with them, and if we do appoint commissioners, expect the commissioners to work with them constructively and productively at all times.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I refer members to my register of interests. I will read the report in full today when I receive it. It's been a great honour to work alongside many Liverpool councillors and council staff who worked so tirelessly to protect the people of Liverpool before and during the pandemic, and indeed were recognised for this work within this chamber. So can the Secretary of State give my great city and its people assurances that this crucial work, on which so many of our constituents rely on, will continue, and that these vital services will be both resourced and protected?
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for those remarks, and I share his thanks and praise for many of the staff of Liverpool City Council, for the wider health and social care sector across the region, for the good work that they've done over the course of the year, in which myself, the Health Secretary, and indeed the Prime Minister has praised them for on many occasions. We want to ensure they continue to have resources, and we want all of government to see this as a moment in which, far from stepping away, rather we should redouble our efforts to support the city through a potentially difficult period. And I will be convening my cabinet and ministerial colleagues in the coming days to reiterate that message to them and ask them to do even more to support Liverpool. There have been good news in recent weeks, including from my right honourable friend, the Chancellor at Liverpool was successful in his application for Freeport status, and that's just one example of good news and investment that I hope will take the city forward in the years to come.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for his statement. It's clear that too many senior people at Liverpool City Council have failed that great city during this pandemic. But it's not just there. Nottinghamshire City Council has given its councillors a bumper pay rise, even after bankrupting the council. And at Durham County Council, Labour run for 102 years. They're spending £50 million plus on a new county hall and a floodplain. And at the height of the pandemic last year, they approved a new 3,500 square foot roof terrace for themselves. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this shows it's not only in Liverpool where the Labour Party has got its priorities wrong, and where Labour councillors are putting themselves above the people they serve?
Well, all councils have a fundamental duty to their residents to provide good value for money. And at the heart of our decision to intervene in Liverpool to commission Max Caller and his report was persuasive evidence that they were falling below that standard, and that is what Max Caller has indeed concluded today. All councils need to ensure they're providing good quality public services and that they are taking care with the money that they're entrusted to. I hope that we can correct the situation in Liverpool that has now gone on for too long, and that other councils across the country in different situations also take note and take particular care when spending the public's money.
Paula Barker.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I would also like to pay tribute to the incredible staff at Liverpool City Council during this very difficult time. And I thank the Secretary of State for coming to the House today and hope he will agree to meet with the 5 members for Liverpool at the earliest opportunity. I, for one, do not doubt the seriousness of the issues that have been raised today, and I look forward to receiving a copy of the Caller report. That public resources have been put at risk is deeply worrying, because resources are needed for investment in the vital services on which my constituents depend. And that is even more so at a time when funding has been cut year on year. So will the Secretary of State take this chance to reassure my wonderful city and anyone concerned that commissioners will be totally independent and their focus will be working on the interests of the people of Liverpool?
I certainly can. The commissioners will be appointed by me and will work to me, but their task is to support the city and its elected leadership to ensure that a good and credible improvement plan is brought forward as quickly as possible, and then that is implemented, and that the mistakes and errors and omissions of the past are put right, so that confidence can be restored to the city, so that the Honourable Lady's constituents can know in confidence they've got a well-functioning City Council, and that we can move forward as swiftly as possible. I share her support for the city. It's a great city. It deserves a good, functioning City Council, and that's exactly what we want to achieve.
Video link. John Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Does this sad but very welcome action not send a firm indication to all councils that we will step in where irregularities over best value, particularly in planning, occur? And would he also comment on his remarks about the need for whole council elections? And does that mark a change across the whole of the country in trying to rid ourselves of those councils that go for elections every year?
Well, the report that we've laid today makes 2 specific recommendations with regard to Liverpool City Council, as I outlined earlier. Firstly, recommending that we move as swiftly as possible to hold council elections, and secondly, recommending single-member wards. This recommendation will, subject to the views of those who will come forward over the coming weeks, be implemented. But I do agree that it has wider application, and that a thread that we have seen through a number of failed councils has been a lack of scrutiny and accountability for members where they've been in multi-member wards, and where having elections time and again in thirds has led to a lack of scrutiny, a lack of focus on the council. So I would like to see more councils take note of these recommendations and implement them on their own regard.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm a very proud Scouser, but listening to the Secretary of State read the contents of the very damning report makes me angry, as will the whole city when the report is made public. But we are a resilient city and we will fight back from this. The city deserves a well-run council with stronger, more transparent governance procedures that are more able to manage public finances. Important steps have been made to do the rights from the wrongs at the council by the current Chief Exec Tony Reeves and the acting mayor. So can the Secretary of State confirm the timetable for the proposed interventions by commissioners, and whether this will be reviewed and monitored and reduced if progress is made at speed? And can you tell us what the role of the Chief Executive and the elected councillors who have supported our community so well during this crisis will play in rebuilding the trust to the public? Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Well, like her fellow Liverpool colleagues, can I thank her for the way in which she's spoken this afternoon. The timetable for the period ahead is that the report is now available for members of the public, for colleagues in Parliament, and for the Council to review and consider at length. They have until the 24th of May to revert to me with comments and representations. We've chosen a longer than normal period, reflecting the fact that the local elections will now take place, enabling the new council and the newly elected mayor the time after the local elections have concluded to meet, to consider and to make those representations to me. Once those representations have been made, I will consider them carefully and decide whether to proceed with the proposal that I've outlined to the House today, or whether to change it in any way. And then I'll revert to the House after that with my final decision. If that is to appoint commissioners, then we'll set out the process and the names of the individuals that I've chosen.
Billy Link. Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The allegations my right honourable friend describes will be familiar to many residents of Sandwell Borough as well. As a former local councillor, I know how important it is that elected members are able to both guide and to scrutinise officers. Does he think that the reason why Liverpool City councillors have been unable to do this in this instance is due to lack of powers, lack of capacity, or lack of capability?
Well, I would recommend that the Honourable Gentleman reads the report by Max Caller, which sets out his observations, having spent the last 3 months working in and around the council, having dozens, if not hundreds, of conversations and interviews with councillors and with officers. He does conclude that the council needs to raise its game substantially. That is in respect of some officers and also some elected members. That there needs to be much greater scrutiny and accountability, that there needs to be much greater care in the way that those elected members manage public money, how they manage directly owned and operated companies that the council has chosen to use, and that it has a greater sense of vision for the future and a business plan for its activities. So there is a great deal of work now ahead for those individuals who are elected after the May elections, and I hope that they will show the leadership that is required to turn the city around, but it will be a big task, but we're here to support them.
Lydia Link. We've got Dan Carden there. We'll just hold on that and go straight to Damien Moore. Damien Moore.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his statement today. As he knows, Mr Speaker, my constituency of Southport, although I'm not in the Liverpool City area, is part of the Liverpool City region. Given our proximity, this situation is causing alarm to my constituents. But will my right honourable friend take further action to allay any fears that my constituents have about our own local authority, but also meet with me to discuss better scrutiny arrangements for local authorities like mine to give further reassurance to constituents?
Well, I'd be happy to meet with my honourable friend, and I should have said in answer to the honourable lady opposite that, of course, I'd be happy to meet with Liverpool City members as well. I believe they met with the local government minister earlier today, but I'd be happy to have a further conversation with them. I should say again that this report is specific to Liverpool City Council. It is not a comment on the neighbouring councils that make up the Liverpool City region, but I understand he may have concerns about his own council, and I'd be happy to discuss those.
Video link. And there you are, Dan Carden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Secretary of State and my honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary, for their statements. We all appreciate the seriousness of the situation. Clearly, we do need to see real change and robust new safeguards that guarantee transparency and accountability. The people of Liverpool must be part of that process. And this week, I've been contacted by local people concerned that sending commissioners into Liverpool amounts to a takeover by Whitehall. So would the Secretary of State take this opportunity to outline to my constituents how their voice and their democratic rights will be respected?
Well, the elections will go ahead in May, and they will see a new directly elected mayor elected. They will also see new councillors elected to the council and the cabinet appointed by the new mayor. It's important that then those individuals firstly make representations to me about the report and what they want to see happen, and depending on the ultimate course of action that I take, having listened carefully to those views, if we do choose to appoint commissioners as I've proposed today, those commissioners will be going to Liverpool to stand behind the elected mayor, the cabinet and the elected members of the city council, not to tell them what to do, but to guide and support them. And I very much hope that the elected members, elected by his constituents, will rise to the occasion, drive the change and reform that's needed on the city council, and the commissioners will never need to exercise their powers. We have given them the authority to act, should they need to, given the seriousness of some of the allegations, but it is not our hope or expectation that those powers will be exercised.
Video link, Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As the Shadow Secretary of State said, my party supports the 7 Nolan principles on standards in public life, be it in town halls or Whitehall, underpinning the Councillors' Code of Conduct and the Ministerial Code. Now, the Standards Board, which promoted high ethical standards in local government and oversaw the nationally imposed Code of Conduct, was abandoned in 2012 by the Secretary of State's government. Considering today's statement, does the Secretary of State think that that was a mistake?
Well, there has been a significant piece of work undertaken by the Committee on Standards in Public Life with respect to the way that ethics and standards are applied within local government at all levels, from parish councils, where we do unfortunately very rarely, but on occasion, see issues of misconduct, bullying and harassment, right the way up to larger councils of the scale of Liverpool City Council. And I'm carefully considering their views on how we should proceed, and we'll be responding to that in due course. And that will set out the government's view and the actions that we're minded to take to ensure that there are always correct processes and always routes for redress, regardless of who is at stake. And that, I think, will provide many of the answers to the Honourable Lady's questions.
Mr. Wakeford.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The report outlined by my right honourable friend mentioned a number of very serious failings by Liverpool City Council over many years. And does he agree that in addition to the steps being taken to improve the council's financial position, an entirely new culture needs to be embedded at the council, and one that puts the residents of Liverpool first?
Yes, the report is clear that a major cultural change is required at the council. Mr Caller concludes that that will require radical change, both by some members and by some officers. I hope that those steps will now be taken. They are absolutely essential if we're going to restore confidence in the council. That's our objective. I'm sure it's the objective of most reasonable people in the City of Liverpool, and we'll be working together to achieve it.
Video link. Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I refer to my register of interests. And having served as a local councillor myself, I've seen the positive difference that local government can make in our communities, despite tough financial circumstances. I know there will be thousands of councillors and council officers who are going above and beyond during the pandemic, including in Liverpool, who will be shocked and saddened by the report's findings and today's announcements. So, does the Secretary of State agree with me that today's announcement is the exception not the norm for local government? So we can reassure those from across all our political parties who are standing for election in May and who want to do the right thing by serving their local communities to the best of their abilities.
The Honourable Lady makes an extremely important point, and one that I made in my opening remarks. This is a rare intervention. Interventions of this nature have only been made on a handful of occasions in the last 20 years. We do so carefully and with a heavy heart, but because it's necessary to ensure that this council can reform, can change its ways, and we can ensure that the people of Liverpool get the good quality government that they deserve. This is not a reflection on local government more generally across this country. In fact, we are taking this action to defend the good name of local government across this country. And I want to pay tribute to officers and councillors the length and breadth of England for the good work they do day in, day out.
Video link. Bob Blackman.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Secretary of State and the Shadow Secretary of State for the comments they've made in a bipartisan manner. Clearly, one of the issues of concern to Liverpool residents will be what extra costs may be borne as a result of this decision. Clearly, the commissioners may be in place for some considerable period of time. So can my right honourable friend reassure us that the Liverpool council taxpayers will not be picking up the costs of these commissioners if they're duly appointed, and that if the commissioners recommend to the Secretary of State further proposals on expenditure, he will consider those appropriately?
Well, the costs of the report that has been undertaken by Max Caller and of the commissioners will be borne by Liverpool City Council. But I expect that the work to come will save the taxpayers of Liverpool a great deal of money, because underlying the report by Mr Caller is the sense that many millions of pounds have been wasted as a result of mismanagement by the City Council, and I very much hope we'll put that right.
Matters.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Newspaper headlines in this kind of situation can often make it appear that a whole council, indeed a whole city, are being traduced. So I welcome the Secretary of State's recognition that there are a number of good people in the council doing a good job. And I also welcome his emphasis on partnership moving forward, because as the Honourable Member for Liverpool Walton said, no one likes to feel that things are being done to them, and it will be much better all round if this is done in a collegiate manner. But the question I want to ask is about transport. Many of my constituents use Mersey travel facilities to get to work and visit family. The Secretary of State didn't expressly refer to that in his statement. Does he know whether that was looked at as part of this investigation?
I don't believe that was looked at as part of this investigation. The highways function of Liverpool City Council was investigated by Mr Caller, and he has made some remarks with regard to some of its processes and contracts that have been entered into with regard to it, but I don't believe he has looked at the broader transport network across the Liverpool City region or made any comment one way or another on that.
Video link. I was not expecting...
Thank you.
No, sorry. It is. It's been switched. Sorry, I was expecting Tim Farron. You clearly are not Tim Farron, but you... but it's been switched again. Vera Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Not so long ago, Liverpool was the